How to remember what you read. When we read interesting articles and books, most of the ideas we get are forgotten after a couple of hours. Many people love and try to read many books, but they find it difficult to convey key ideas or their plot. Students and schoolchildren have the same problem. Remember yourself. You spent whole semesters studying different subjects and spending dozens of hours studying the material, but you forgot most of the ideas within a few hours after taking the exams. In 1888, the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus investigated human memory and deduced the forgetting curve. The scientist conducted a series of experiments with students. They memorized nonsense words using a variety of techniques, and Ebbinghaus measured the time and noted how quickly they forgot information. It turned out that after the first hour, up to 60% of all the information received is forgotten. 10 hours after memorization, 35% remains in memory. Further, the process of forgetting is slow. After 6 days, about 20% of the total number of originally learned words remain in memory. At best, the same amount remains in memory in a month. In other words, if you don't review what you've recently learned, you'll likely forget most of the material and your memory of it will continue to deteriorate in the following days. In the end, you will forget everything. That is why even excellent students over the summer sometimes forget the program of the last academic year. Our memory is also affected by the impact of scientific and technological progress. Anytime, anywhere access to data has an impact on human memory, ultimately changing how the brain functions. With so much information available, the need for memorization is reduced. Thanks to Google, we can quickly find everything we need. As a result, the internet becomes a kind of external memory. At least that's what the study says. Google effects on memory, cognitive consequences of having information at our fingertips. Betsy Sparrow, Jenny Liu and Daniel Wegner conducted a series of experiments on how the human brain uses memory when actively working with computers or smartphones. The study says the advent of the internet has made accessing information as easy as raising a finger. We can take a laptop or smartphone and Google an old classmate, find articles on the internet, a recipe, a life hack, basically anything. Knowing that in the future we will have access to information, we make less effort to remember and fully understand it. As a result, the level of perception of such information will be lower. On the other hand, we are also more prone to uninterrupted consumption of information due to the emergence and development of media resources. Remember how you stayed at home on a Saturday night and watched the entire season of your favorite show? Can you remember the storyline for each episode? The availability of open sources of information contributes to the thoughtless consumption of content. People, even involuntarily, often put more into their memory than they can handle. Jared Horvath from the University of Melbourne found that people who watched non-stop TV programs forgot about them much faster than people who watched one episode a week. Moreover, their enjoyment of the show was less than that of people who watched it once a day or weekly. The situation is similar with reading. Most often, we read to gain new knowledge, not just information. The fact is that information will never become knowledge unless it is fixed in the mind. Why do we really read? Learn something or feel like we've learned something? Information comes in, we understand it, and it seems to take hold in our minds. But in fact, it's easy to forget if you don't put in the effort and focus on certain strategies to help you remember it. The lesson learned from Jared Horvath's research on spending long hours in front of the TV or watching a season of a show at a time is that if you want to remember what you watch and read, set intervals between retrieval of information. Think back to the learning process in school. As a rule, large works are divided into separate parts and, for example, in a week you learned only a few chapters of a work with an interval of a couple of days. Also, in order to better remember information, I recommend using the method of meaningful questions. Whenever you read something you want to remember, take notes. But they should not summarize the main points that you want to remember. Instead, analyze the information and take notes with questions about the generalized idea from it. For example, you can come up with a couple of questions for an article or chapter of a book that summarize the main ideas or important concepts that you want to remember. This will greatly facilitate your work and save time compared to if you tried to paraphrase the words of the author into your own words and write it down. When you fix and ask yourself the main questions at the end of each chapter, you not only train your memory, but also learn how to properly structure and logically reproduce information. In fact, everything is simple, and the meaningful questions method will work if you follow a few rules. First, don't overdo it. Trying to remember every possible fact from a book will make reading so tedious that it may kill your desire to read. It is quite possible that a couple of questions for an article, for a chapter or section of a book, are more than enough. Second, write down the page numbers on which the answers are located, or add them to bookmarks with notes in the case of using ebooks. If you want to quickly brush up on information, you'll know where to find it. Third, make reading technology easy. For paper books, you can use special cards on which you can write down your questions. Essentially, these cards will work like a bookmark, so you don't have to look up entries later. If, like me, you use ebooks, you can write down your questions in the form of annotations. You can then come back to them later to check yourself. Well, remember the importance of scheduling intervals between the time of information consumption and periodic repetitions. For each, these intervals will be individual. By trial and error, select your own. By the way, while I was studying materials on the topic, I came across an interesting book by Harry Lorraine and Jerry Lucas, The Development of Memory. In the future, I will make a brief overview of the main tools proposed in it. I already practice the method of meaningful questions and do not try to cover all the material at once. At first, it was difficult to force myself to come up with more questions, and then remember the answers. But as you do this, you will get better and better. It all depends on the purpose for which you read. If you want the information to become knowledge and stay in your head, try the suggestions. How do you recall the information? Write in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, like it, and click on the bell to keep up with new videos.